Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Microsoft Access Training. My name is Stan. I'll be your host and trainer for the day today from a company called Excel and Access. And it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity. So, Eric, thank you. And thank you all that are joined with us today. Up front, let me just apologize. My voice is not 100%. I'll try to mute myself if I happen to start coughing, but otherwise we should be okay. Over the next couple of hours, we will be reviewing the very basics of databases and Microsoft Access specifically. But before we get into all that, I just want to stress Access is really best learned in a workshop-style environment. So we'll be doing a couple of exercises throughout the class. I'll be asking some questions of all of you guys. So please participate. That's going to be key. Ask questions. Obviously can't see you all, so I won't know if you're lost or not sure about something I've said or want me to repeat something. So in a web-based training like this, really important that everyone actively participates. I welcome the questions, so please don't be shy. There's a couple ways you can ask me something. For one, obviously, I'm sure if you've called in, you can just feel free to speak up. If not, there's also on the right side where the little GoToWebinar has opened, there is a chat feature. If you guys want to try that out and send me a test message, or if you see that on the right side, you can at any point in time send a chat out there, and then I can answer the question as we get to it. So again, please, feel free to jump in any time. Though I really want everyone to participate as much as possible, and as they usually say, a question that you may have, somebody else may have as well. So please feel free. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the agenda and see what we're going to look at today. So today is day one. Obviously, we're going to do the intro and database fundamentals, and the other session, which I don't think we've scheduled yet, but that is where we're really going to get into data analytics. So looking a little closely at today's agenda, we're really going to start with what is a relational database, which is what Access is, and how is it different from Excel. We'll talk about two really important concepts called data normalization and standardization. And then we'll review and get into Access specifically. Look at the interface, look at the layout, figure out how to get through Access and where to click to do what. And then we'll really focus on tables and fields today. And hopefully by the end of the session, we can swing by the joins section. And that will really set us up really well for the second session, which is where we get into queries and really the analysis of the data that is in those tables. So I guess let's start with the first concept of a database and how it's different from Excel. So let's break this one out to the audience first off and foremost. Does anyone want to tell me how would you define a database? And if someone is frantically looking at Wikipedia right now, that is definitely minus points. But if anyone want to speak up, what do you guys think? How would you define a database?
A set of connected, fields of information. Okay,
yeah, very good. And that's exactly right. It's basically sets of data, right? To say it another way, if you have lots of different data and different unique data sets, but that are all somehow connected or related. That's why it's called a relational database, because there are relationships between the data. So for example, if you have a PO database, you may have some data that has customers and some data that has items. And although those are all kind of unique little pieces, ultimately they all come together when an order is placed. And they all have relationships built amongst them. And that's what's really key about a database. So really an organized collection or set of data. And it's that table structure that makes it different. Let's take a look at some other differences that are less obvious, but just as important. You can see here in Excel, obviously, Excel is very easy to set up. You open up an Excel file and you just start typing away. You can put in numbers and text, and it really doesn't matter. You can do anything you want in any cell you want, and Excel will not stop you. So it's very flexible. Everything's on that one spreadsheet. I mean, obviously, you can set up multiple tabs, but everything is right there in front of you. But the downsides are that there are no rules. There's no data rules. It can be very unorganized, as I'm sure every person that you know, including maybe even yourself included, probably has a spreadsheet that is ugly. And that's part of the great appeal of Excel is that you can set up anything you want, but obviously one of the downsides as well. And there's a high error potential. If you guys have some really complicated Excel files, I bet you have an Excel file that started out innocently enough and then grew to some sort of monstrosity. And maybe there's some formula that maybe you forgot to copy all the way down, or somebody else forgot to copy all the way down. There's a very high error potential in Excel. Access, on the other hand, is sort of the opposite. It does require a little bit of setup time, but it's much more organized. The structure of the data specifically is much more rigid. We won't just be able to start typing away to create data sets. It's actually predefined into small pieces of what are called data tables, and those data tables have a very rigid and specific structure to them. But we can also add validation rules right into data tables, and formulas that we use only need to be written once, and you'll see that, which means that there's a much lower error potential. So there are some pros and cons, but we'll look at those today as we work with Access. You'll see how that works. So with that, why don't we jump right into the concept of normalization and standardization, as I was talking about a little earlier, and what those are and how that's important. I made it a point so far to sort of stress the organization of a database, and I kind of mentioned data into small pieces. But let's think about and talk about why that's important. And what the concept is of these is really uniqueness. I want you to keep thinking of uniqueness. Every table, which is what contains your data, and you'll see that later, but every data table needs to be unique. We need to have unique lists of data, and it keeps us organized, and it's easier to find. Has anyone here out there seen the movie WALL-E? Do you guys remember WALL-E at all from Disney Pixar? Well, there's a really great scene. The movie's about this little trash compactor robot guy whose name is WALL-E, and he lives in this kind of deserted post-apocalyptic Earth, and he goes around and he collects trash, and then sometimes he finds an item that interests him, and he brings it back home with him. Why don't we take a quick look? A quick clip. This is from WALL-E. Let's take a quick look here. This is him returning home back to his little house after a night or a day of foraging. All right, so quick little clip, but what you saw there was obviously with the lighter, he had a bucket of lighters, right? And he just threw that lighter right in with the rest of them. How did he know where to put it? Easy. He had it organized, and he had a bucket of lighters that was really easy. On the other hand, he had a little trouble with that spork, but you saw that he had that bucket or that little cup of spoons and then a cup of forks. So if we were to imagine that he were then to sit down for a meal and he needed a fork and a spoon, he would know exactly where to find it, right? So in other words, the better we keep things organized into unique sets of data, one thing of spoons, one thing of forks, one thing of lighters, the more we keep it organized, the later or the easier it is to find things later. And then we can all bring it back together again when we need to. Data is basically the exact same way as WALL-E's little garage there. So let's take a look at a sample file and actually look at data specifically. and see how that works in a data set. So here's an Excel file that I created, just a little sample data set. Can you guys all see that? I'm assuming so?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in this Excel file, you can see that this is this is something that you could technically have in Excel, just a contact list. But what if I wanted to know how many people are in, how many contacts do I have? Could I answer a question that easily just by looking at this? Well, I sort of can, right? But it's not in the ideal format. I'd have to go through and say, oh, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5. It would not be intuitive to quickly count, right? And that's because it's not in the most ideal format of things broken up into its unique pieces. But what if I were to do that? What if I were to split this one data set into 2 unique data sets? Let's take a look at the exact same data set, but split up into 2 unique pieces. So take a look at this now. I have a contacts table here on the left and a phone numbers table here on the right. And now let's say I were to ask you guys the exact same question. How many contacts do I have? Do you see how easy it was to just come over here and look and say, oh, you have 5? That took no time at all, right? Because it was broken up into its smallest unique piece. Now, what you'll notice, though, as part of doing that and splitting up that data into 2 separate sets is when I split the data up, I need to have something so that I can get it back together again. So what I've added to both of these tables is a column called contact ID. And I've added it to both. And what's important about that field is that's going to be our linking field. So for those of you that use VLOOKUPs a lot in Excel, you could probably already imagine using this column contact ID as a VLOOKUP so that this one name here relates to these 2 phone numbers there. And this name here, for example, relates to these 3 phone numbers there, using contact ID as my common field or common data element. So what this is called in Access, or in any database really, is a key field. And there's some terminology here, but in this context table, this column contact ID is called a primary key. And what that means is that it is the value that is unique in this table. And you'll see later, but every table in Access, it's really important that every table in Access have at least one column that contains a unique identifier for every row. Now here's the good news. In Access, we can set up tables so that there is a column using what's called an auto number field, and we'll see this in a little bit. But basically, we can create it so that Access will automatically assign a unique number to every new row. So that's going to be awesome for us on this side of things. And then as we look at the phone numbers table, in this table, this column here, that's called the foreign key. And so in other words, the foreign key is basically a value, a column that contains values that is a primary key in some other table. By designating these as primary and foreign key and understanding that relationship between these 2 tables, we can then later do analysis to bring this back together again so that later if we were to want to analyze and say, show me all of my contacts and phone numbers, similar to what you would think of as a VLOOKUP, we can always get back to this structure. Now, this is going to be an important concept, as I mentioned, when it comes back to analytics. But this does seem like a lot of work, doesn't it? Why would we do all this just to split this up, add this column, add these numbers, and why in the world would we do this? Well, we talked already a little bit how much easier it will be to answer certain questions, like how many contacts do I have? But really, it's also more scalable. As I add more phone numbers to this practice sample data set, I really only have to add it here. And I don't have to retype in the name every time, which means that the storage is much more efficient and I'm not repeating things on every row. It also means that I'm going to improve accuracy. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I threw in a little wrench here on the first tab. I misspelled cobblepot on purpose here in that second row of the 3 cobblepots, because this is so common when you're doing data entry, right, in a big spreadsheet. You're just typing it in and maybe you missed it. But guess what happens later if you're trying to find the unique set of these? These are not going to be unique. These are going to be unique, excuse me, and they're not going to condense into one name. And as a result, you're going to end up with a false count. Whereas in this setup, I only had to enter in the name once, and every time I have a new phone number, so here are 3 phone numbers for Oswald Cobblepot. Every time I have a new phone number, all I have to do is add it here and not retype the name. That makes it far more, or decreases the likelihood of error because I only have to type it in one time. So quick audience question then again. Looking at this data set, I actually did not even break this up into its most unique pieces. There are still some places where I'm repeating data. Does anybody want to chime in? Where do you guys see another opportunity where technically we could split this up into another separate third table?
Type.
Type.
Yep, that's exactly right. So technically I could and really should, if I were to be setting this up from scratch, have another table here called the type table or phone number type, whatever you want to call it. And that table would contain the unique values. So there'd be a home, a cell. I wouldn't need to repeat home, right? Home, cell, fax, work, just the unique values. And they would exist in a table. And we'd add its own primary key, where we would have type ID here as its primary key. So that would be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then over here there would be type. And this would be things like home and cell. And then over here we would just need to replace these. Instead of this type column, we would switch this out and we would have a type ID column, which links back to this table over here on the right. And so home, if home was 1, this would just be a 1, and this would be a 2, and so on. And then we would just be able to get rid of this column altogether so that our phone numbers table was just these 3 columns like that. That's called data normalization and standardization. Does that make sense? And any questions about why we do that and how that works? Okay, great. So let's hold on to that concept. I'm going to, for now, just remove this just to kind of have it back to this. But let's hold on to this concept. We'll be visiting this very shortly. And now let's actually get into the Access interface itself. So at this point, I am going to go a little slower. What I invite you to please do is to follow along on your own screen. So jump back and forth between the webinar screen here and you actually doing this on your own. We're going to open a new database and kind of look around. So there'll be times we'll be kind of flipping back and forth. So I will try and go a little slower, make sure to keep everyone together here, okay? So first things first, let's open a brand new database. I'm going to go over here to Microsoft Access, and I have Access 2010. I don't know if you guys have 2010 or 2013 or some other version, but I am going to be basing this on 2010. Hopefully what you see if you're using a different version is similar. So I'm going to go here, and this is the first thing you see when you try and open up a new database. On the left side, a bunch of templates. Access does have a number of built-in templates, but really for our purposes today, we're going to be creating a brand new database on the right side here, blank database. And really what it's asking for is a file name. And that brings us to our very first difference between Access and Excel. As you know, in Excel, you just bring it open and it's open. In Access, on the other hand, you actually have to create and save the file before you can open and use it. So that's why it's asking for a file path before you can click create. So I'm just going to throw this on my desktop, and I'm just going to call this training database, training DB. So I'm going to say training DB. It's going to default to this data type and that our file type, and I'm going to click OK. So you should see here the file name that I just created and then the path that it's going to create it into. And then I'm going to click create. Everyone with me on that? Okay, and what you can see, the first thing it did is it automatically tried to create a table for me. You can see here in the layout, in the very main part of this window, it says table 1, and it's already asking for me to click to add. And this is basically like Excel. They tried to make it like Excel, where you can just start typing in. The problem with this is it's never a good way to do it, so I never do this way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to close this table because we're going to make our own in a second. So this takes us to our first navigation piece. how to close a table or close an object, and there's a couple different ways to do that. The first way is with your mouse. If you hover over the tab at the top, you can right click and there's a button for close. Alternatively, if you're into shortcut keys and using the keyboard a lot, if you hold Control and then push W, hold Control, push W, it will also close the table that way. And that's actually, for those that are curious, that's actually a shortcut key that works in a lot of Microsoft products. In Excel, it does work as well. You can close your workbook that you're working with. Hold it using Control and then W, holding Control, pushing W. Okay, so we're in our blank database here, and let's take you through the interface and show you everything that we have here. Now, the first piece that's the most important is on the left here where it says All Access Objects. And this navigation bar on the left here is your toolbar for all of the objects in a database. Well, what does that mean? In Excel, we know things are worksheets, right? The tabs at the bottom are worksheets, and then every worksheet is broken up into cells. In Access, things are organized a little bit differently. Let's take a look at the different Access objects. If you guys were on your screen, please come over to mine. And let me show you, let's review the different type of objects. So here we are, tables. Those are our first type, and that is where all of your data storage is. So every piece of data will be stored in a data table. Data tables can have multiple columns, multiple rows, but remember, we're going to be thinking of things hopefully as uniquely as possible. And as you saw in our earlier example, when we were looking at those phone numbers, we would have 2 tables or even 3 if we extended out the normalization there. So tables are our data storage. All of our data is contained in tables. Data, there is nowhere else that data itself is contained. Every piece of data is in a table. The next type of object is a query. A query is basically a little mini program or script that runs some sort of analysis on those data tables. So our queries, and we're going to focus on queries in the second session. And that's all about data analytics. We can also create forms and Access. That's used for user interface. So we can build an entire user interface on top of the tables and queries so that you can do things like data entry. If you want, it'll be in a nicer form than the raw data table itself. Think of like a website. When you go on a website and you have to fill in your credit card information to buy something on Amazon, that's a form. You're not actually looking at the table that contains all of the people's data, right? You just enter in what you need and then you click Save. So we can create forms like that in Access. Reports. Access can actually also create PDF style reports based on the analysis that you do in the queries section. And then there's a macros and modules. That's really that's the more advanced piece of Access, where you can actually create built-in script and programs to do automation and all kinds of really cool advanced functionality. So today, as I mentioned earlier, we're really focusing on tables and really getting comfortable with the data itself. And then in the next session, we'll move on to queries and figure out how to use those tables. Okay, so these are all of the objects. And as we create those objects, they will be displayed on the left in this toolbar, categorized by the type. And there is a little drop down here at the top where we can click and you can see it will be organized by object type, but we can change it. This is the best way to look at it though. What that'll mean is that as you have tables, you'll see there'll be a little subheader for tables, and it will show all the tables, and then a subheader for queries and so on. You can also filter specifically on one grouping or the other. So let's say I only want to look at my tables. You can use this to do that. I just leave it on all access objects so I can see everything. That is the navigation on the left. You can also use this search. Obviously, if you have a huge database with hundreds of tables, the search is nice to be able to find a specific table you're looking for. Okay, so let's move up to the ribbon then and see what's going on in the ribbon. So in our standard little ribbon here, we start obviously on the home ribbon, and you'll see, and I don't know if you're in 2012 or 2013, but either way, you should see kind of these groupings that kind of help you see and understand what those items are for. Our clipboard for copying and pasting, sorting and filtering. So as we're in tables, that makes sense to do sorts and filters. We'll be able to do that in the data tables themselves, just like in Excel. So you'll notice that'll be very familiar. We have record management, so things like deleting a record, adding a record. Remember, we're much more organized and structured in Access, so it's not the same as Excel where you just go to a cell and push delete, although you can do that. But really, here, everything is organized with rows and columns specifically. So when we think of deleting, we have to think of deleting a whole row. And so that's called a record. So some of this terminology is sort of synonymous. A record or a row is the same. And a column or a field is the same. And you'll see that in a second as well. We have a find and search section here on the home ribbon. And then all of your text formatting that you're typically used to from Microsoft Word and Excel. Going to the next tab on the ribbon here is the Create tab. And just like we mentioned all of the different objects, this is where you create new ones. So we talked about tables, queries, forms, reports, and then macros and code. So obviously we can create tables, we can create queries, we can create forms, and we can create reports and code. So the Create tab, anytime you want to make something new, this is where we're going to go, and we'll do this in a second. But let's move on to the next tab, External Data. And as you would expect, there's really two things as far as external data goes. There's how do I get data in, and how do I get data out. So the Import and Link section is to import data into Access. We can bring in data from Excel, another Access database, an ODBC database. I don't know if you guys work with that, but that's things like SQL Server or QuickBooks or any other kinds of database that you may have, SAP, for example, if you have accounting software. You can also import text files and XML files. And then export. We'll be able to export to Excel or export to text or even PDF and email things just like you would in, let's say, Excel. So that's your external data tab, really all about getting data in or out. And then finally, our database tools. This is advanced functionality. We will revisit one of the sections here, but these are sort of advanced features within Access. Many of it deals with code here and some more advanced features. We will go into one of the items on here later, but I will come back to that. But really, we're going to, when we talk about joins and how tables are related to one another, we're going to be really using this relationships button within the database tools. But we'll come back to that, so nothing to worry about just yet. Okay, other than that, we have our ribbon, we have our left toolbar, our main big part of this screen, this big gray area. This is where our actual objects will be viewed on screen as we open them. And then along the bottom, we have a little status bar. You can see for now it just says ready, and then a little indicator as to whether or not my number lock key is on or not. Okay, so that's the layout. It's actually pretty simple. Any questions so far? Okay, great. So let's move on and let's actually make our very first table. So what I'm going to do, and again, please follow along with me here. I'm going to go to the Create tab. Remember, every time I want to make something new, I'm going to go to the Create tab. And I'm going to click under Tables. I want to click on Table Design. So click on Table Design under the Create tab. And you can see it creates this screen. So what is this exactly? Because this is obviously going to be new to us. This is not how we're used to creating data in Excel. What this is, and I mentioned earlier, the word field is synonymous with table. What it's asking for here is the structure of the table that we're going to create. So in Excel, you can start typing. We've talked about that. But in Access, before you can actually just start typing and creating a table, you have to first tell Access what are the columns going to be, and for each column, what kind of data is going to be inside of that column. So if you think of it as in Excel we have this format cells. So if we were to select a section, either you can go up to the top and select the format, right? Date, time, accounting, currency, number, general text, things like that. Or sometimes you go to that using format cells, right? If you're familiar, if you're good with Excel, you probably use that a lot. Format cells and you pick what category. This is very similar to what we're doing in Access, although it's a little bit more restrictive because there is no general. We have to specifically pick a type. And so that's what these things are. So it's a little confusing at first, but basically what this is visually is every row in this setup represents a column in our data table. Let me just say that again because it's a little opposite, right? Every row in this data setup is a column in our ultimate data table. So let's start with our field name. So remember, field is the same thing as column. So what is our first field? And let's practice by setting up our contacts table that we were looking at earlier, because it's nice and simple and neat. So if we were going to set up our contacts table, and I'm going to just minimize this like this so that we can see everything. So if we wanted to set up our contacts table, our first column is contact ID. What is the name of it? It's contact ID. So I'm going to type in contact ID. I am not going to put a space between contact ID. I'll explain why we do that later, but for now, let's just go with that. And then as I come to data type, you can see there is a drop down for different types. Let's do a quick review of those. If you want to, I'll kind of come back to my screen. I'll show you a quick slide on that. Oops. Let's take a look at the data types in Access. And again, if you're familiar with the format cells, you're going to be familiar with many of these. But we have text. That's your short text. That's your go-to for anything that isn't some sort of huge, long text, crazy text field. That's going to be a very go-to standard for you. Memo is the one exception. If you know that you have text that can be like a notes field or a comments column, you have no idea how long that text is going to be, select the memo, because that's going to be, it's not going to have that cutoff of 255 characters. We have a number field, and this could be integers or decimals. There is an exception, but we'll come back to that in a second. For now, we'll just call that number. There is date time for dates and times. Auto number, this is huge. This is that field that we talked about earlier. This is going to be a column where Access will automatically assign a sequential number, 1, 2, 3, 4. Every time you add a new row, it'll just automatically fill that in. So when we talk about tables with their primary keys, auto number is going to be the data type that you're going to use. And so every table, excuse me, I would think should have an auto number field. It makes life a lot easier. If you have a column that just has a bunch of yes, no's or true, false, in Access, these are all the same thing, true, false, yes, no, and visually it can be represented by a checkbox. So if you have that, it's just a much more efficient way to store that value so that it removes the potential error for somebody not typing in true or false correctly or mistyping it. We can also have a data type that is hyperlink. So if we have emails or for email addresses, or also we can actually have a data type that is a link to a website or an internal document link. If you have a document stored somewhere on a local hard drive or a network hard drive, you can use this hyperlink data type to store that kind of data. Attachment is an interesting one. You can actually attach files to Access itself as opposed to link them. Just be careful with that. If you use that data type, it actually attaches the file to the table and to the database itself. You can end up with a very large database very quickly if you start attaching a bunch of documents. But it's a pretty cool feature for smaller data sets, meaning you can attach an Excel file or an image or something like that to an actual system. There is also this currency data type. Don't use it. I'm going to make it easy for you guys. Don't use it. The currency data type is like the number data type, but it automatically formats it. And the problem with that is that let's say you have a calculation that you do that, let's say, a percentage. If you use the currency data type, it's going to cut off those leading digits. It'll be sort of stored in the data, but you won't see them because it's going to format everything as currency. Never use it that way. If we need to have something displayed as currency as part of a report or an analysis, we can format it there. So currency, just don't use it. You're going to want to use number instead. And there's also another way you can do an actual calculated field. Again, don't use it. We're going to use queries to do analysis. A data table itself should never contain calculated values. It should just be raw data. And then all of our analysis will be in queries. That way we know exactly where to find things and where to find these formulas. You hide them inside the table structure and nobody will ever find it and nobody will know what's going on. So looking at those then, let's head back over to our example and set up our contacts table. So for contact ID, as I mentioned, that we want to be our primary key and it'll be our automatic identifier. So I'm going to select from this list auto number. So on that first row, we should have contact ID auto number. Okay, let's go to the next column, which in this case is the next row, and that is the contact. So I'm going to type in contact on the second row of this structure, and under data type, I'm going to select text. I don't expect any of these names to be longer than 255 characters, so we can just pick text. Does everyone have that? If you're hopefully following along, and you have that filled in on your screen as well. So this brings us to another item here. At the top of the ribbon, you can see once we started creating this table, you can see there was a new ribbon option that says Table Tools Design. And there are some new options here, things like inserting and deleting rows. So as we type and create these structures, if we want to reorganize these, we can insert rows. We can also, I want to just point out, we can drag and drop. So if I have a row highlighted, I can click and move it somewhere. If I want to reorganize the structure, the order that these appear is the order that they will appear in the data table themselves. So you can reorganize things that way. So you can see here, insert and delete rows also. I also want to point out a really important button here. Look at that, primary key. This is going to designate a field as primary key. We talked about this earlier. So this field here, contact ID, is a primary key in this table. So what we're going to do here before we save and close this is we're going to highlight that contact ID row, that first row, and then click on primary key at the top there. After you do that, you'll notice that there's a little key icon on that first row on the gray margin there of the table structure. That's indicating that that is in fact a primary key, and that is what we want, and that's good. Okay, if everybody has that, we're ready to save this table and name it and close it. So the first thing we want to do, just like in Excel or any other really thing, any other Microsoft Office application, Control S will save. So we can either use the shortcut key for Control S, or at the very top there's a save button, or on the right, if we right click on the tab name, we can click save there. Any one of those three ways will work, and any one of those three, whichever one we do, it will bring up a box asking us what do we want to call it. So for now, we're going to call this TBL contact. So why are we calling it TBL contact? This is a great time to talk about naming conventions. So in Access, all of our objects are going to have a name. Every table will have a name. Every query will have a name. When we name these things, we want to name them with something consistent and something that tells us what that object is. When I was learning Access, the person that taught me used this naming convention, TBL for tables and QRY for queries. You can call it, I've seen big T underscore and then whatever the name is, or little t underscore, or maybe just little t. Whatever it is, it does not matter as long as you are consistent with what you do. It's going to be really important, and it just makes things a lot easier later as we're looking at these objects. But I'm going to just go with what I know. So I'm going to call this TBL contact, and then I'm going to say OK. As soon as you click OK, you will notice a couple things. The tab at the top is now called TBL contact. And look at the left side. Remember I mentioned that this is where we're going to see all of our objects? Well, there, take a look. There's the tables header, and there's our TBL contact. It now exists because we saved it and we created it. Okay, let's now close this. I'm going to right click on the tab to close, or again, right click on the tab to close, or you can hold Control and click W, or you can use the little X over here on the right, and you can see as I hover over it, it says close TBL contact. Make sure to press that one and not the big X that closes Access altogether. So I'm going to close this table. Okay, so here's our table, TBL contact. Well, we created the structure, but what if I want to look at the table itself? Well, once I have this table created, we can open it. Again, lots of different ways to do these things, many ways to skin a cat, and in Access that is definitely true. We can, if we're highlighted on it as we are now, we can just push the Enter key. That will open the table. The other way we can do it is we can double click. That will open the table. And the third way is we can right click on the object and click on Open. All of those three ways open up the table. So we're in the table right now, and now this is the table itself. And you can see I want to point out some navigation things here and how this works. In this view, we can do things very similar to Excel. I can hover my mouse between the columns and increase the column widths. I can click on the little drop downs to do things like sorting and filtering. It's almost like in Access, every table has a built-in filters bar at the top, which is really convenient. At the bottom, you'll notice there's a new status bar that has record navigation. So in this case, we are currently on 1 of 1, meaning there is no data in here yet. We are on the first and new records. You see this says new here. And then there are some filters and search bars at the bottom, all part of this table. Okay, so we have created this table. We can open it. We can see what's going on. Let's take a look at the different views. So we are right now in what's called datasheet view. If I close this table or actually right-click on the tab, you can see this is called datasheet view, and this is kind of the result view. But when we created this table, we were in what's called design view. You can always switch back and forth between the two views by right-clicking on this tab and going to design view. And this takes us back to that other view, the other way where we set it up. Let's say you need to add a new column to a table. This is how you would do it. You would go to the design view. And when we're in this design view, you can see in this ribbon at the top left corner, there is this views shortcut. And you can go back and forth between datasheet view, which is the kind of the result view, or click on here and go to design view. So this table has two different views, different ways of looking at the same table, and that's what those are, and that's how you navigate between the two. So the top left corner, or you can right click on it here and go to design or datasheet view, or you can right click here and go to open, which is datasheet view or design view. Any questions on any of that? How to navigate that, what the table looks like, and all that? Okay, let's talk about then how we actually add in some data. I'm going to go back to datasheet view, and let's actually type in the first kind of couple rows just to see what that looks like. I'm going to start typing in here Bruce Wayne. Excuse me. And as I type in Bruce Wayne, I want you to notice what's happening. The first thing is that contact ID column, which we set up as an auto number, has automatically filled in with the number 1. As I mentioned to you before, this is a great feature within Access. It will automatically assign that number. You'll also notice the little pencil icon on the left side of that row. That means that I am currently editing this row. I'm currently changing this row. Now, once I click away, that row has been established and saved, which brings us to one of the most important concepts in all of using an Access database. And that is that Access databases are live update systems. In other words, when I type something, and as soon as I move away from what I just typed, it has already saved that. This is not like Excel, where I can make a bunch of changes, and then when I close it, it says, hey, do you want to save this? No. In Access, once I type it in and move away, it has saved it already. Now, there is an exception, which is the undo feature. There is an undo feature, and that is if you like shortcut keys, that is you hold Control and push on the Z key. So I can click Control Z if I want to undo that, and it asks me, oh, well, you just added a row. Do you want to delete that row? I'm going to say no in this case, but just to let you know, you can only undo so much. So just realize that as you're typing, it is a live update. It is actually updating what you're doing. Keep that in mind. That's huge. Okay, so I added Bruce Wayne. I'm going to come over here and add another record. Let's add Clark Kent, and you can see as I type it in, it creates contact ID 2 automatically. Okay. So now that I have 2 rows in here, we can now look at the little drop down here. And now that there is some data, you can see we have our filters at the bottom here, just like in Excel. Like I said, it acts just like in an Excel filter bar, which is really great. It's already built into every table, so you don't actually have to do anything to create that. But just notice the structure of this. We're far more organized, right? I mean, there is this click to add here on the right to create new columns, but I strongly advise you to never use that. If you need to create a new column, you want to go into design view to do it. That way you can set up the structure of it. But you can see here, I can't just click down here and start typing, 10 rows down. It's one row at a time, one column at a time, as far as the structure goes. Far more rigid than Excel, but keeps us more organized. The navigation tools at the bottom are now lit up, so we can use things like go to the first record, go to the next record, go to the last record, go to a new blank record. These are the little features at the bottom. It tells us how many total records we have. There's 2 total records. We can click in here to go to a specific record. I want to go to the first record. You can push 1 and then enter. It'll take us to the first. Or if you have 1,000 rows, you can type in a number. It'll take you to that row. And we can do things like search. If I want to search for Kent, you can see as I start typing, it automatically finds it for me. So this little navigation toolbar at the bottom, very useful as well in a table view here. Control F, if you're familiar with that in Excel, for find. That works in Access as well. Holding Control, pushing F brings up a find and replace. I suggest not using the replace feature. We can do that using a query and save what we changed. But the find is good enough. Just keep in mind here, it's going to ask you, do you want to look at the current field? Remember, field is the same as column. So am I searching the current column or the entire document, which in this case means table? And then do I want to match any part of the field, or do I want to have the entire whole field be a complete match, or start of a field? And then you can do case sensitivity and all that. So great features here, kind of an advanced version of the search down here. And that's Control F, and you can access that within a table anytime you want. Okay, any questions on tables and table views and all that?
Quick question, why do we do no spacing again on like contact ID and contact?
Yes, okay, great question. So you're gonna see that a lot in the second session, but the reason that I did not create spaces in the column names is later we're gonna be doing analysis. And when we do the analysis on these columns, let's say you wanted to do a sum of 2 columns, for example. If you have a space in the column name, when I write my formula, I will have to have a, hold on, I'll show you. Hold on. When I write my formula later, for let's say I had a column called amount, and then I had another column called final amount. And then let's say I wanted to add these 2 together. If there is no space in the column, I can just write amount and it'll know what it means. If there is a space, I have to put a bracket around it to tell it that this is all one name, the name of one column. It's a cumbersome, annoying thing that you'd have to do. So I recommend always making column names not have spaces, because later for formulas, it's a million times easier to not have to write in the brackets. So it'll pay itself forward in the next session, but it's a huge time saver. It's one of those things you learn from experience, and it's a huge difference. So I strongly recommend having field names never have spaces. If you need to use underscores, use underscores. Or what I typically, again, this is part of what you like and what you like visually. Some people use a lot of underscores. Other people just like to use capitalization to make the difference. So something like that. It's up to you what kind of standard naming convention you do for your column names, but I strongly recommend not using spaces because of this. But good question, thank you. Any other questions on tables and how I open tables, how I close tables in general?
Just do a quick overview again of opening and closing them and switching between views.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I were to start off as, let me just do this. So as I start blank here, we have this one object. To open this table, there are 3 ways to do that. I can double click, that's a left double click with the mouse on the table on the left itself. That opens it up, and by default, tables will open up into this view, which is called data sheet view. I can also right click and go to open to go to data sheet view, or because I right clicked, I can also go straight into design view. So those are the two ways to open that. And then the third way is just using your keyboard. If you're highlighted on it, you just click enter on your keyboard and that will open up the table as well. Again, directly into data sheet view. Data sheet view is the default view. Closing a table, again, multiple ways. Once it's open, I can right click on the tab at the top and go to close. I can click on the small X on the right here for close TBL contact. Or I can, using shortcut keys, hold Control and click W as in water, and that will close the table as well. So 3 ways to open it, 3 ways to close it. I want to point out the one thing, you're going to say, Stan, you lied to me. You said that save doesn't mean anything in here, but I saw on here save. This save is, in this view, what's called the layout view. So let me show you something. If I open this table and I move this column to make it wider, and then I try and close it, it's going to ask me, do you want to save changes to the layout? And that's the key word here. It didn't ask you about the data. The data has already been saved if I made a data change. It's the layout, in this case, meaning the column width. So if I say yes, and I come back into the table, you can see that column is just as wide as it was before. If I were to add a third row here, and then also make this narrower, and now try and close it, it's going to still say, do you want to save the layout? But that has nothing to do with the fact that I added that third row for Peter Parker. It's only basically asking me if I want to save the fact that I made the contact ID, or the contact column, excuse me, narrower. So if I say yes, well, let me actually say no. If I say no, it still saved Peter Parker when I reopen it. It just didn't save the column width. So the save that you're looking at here has to do with the column widths. And actually, you can also adjust the row height as well. That's what that save is referring to. It has nothing to do with the data. So, and that's why I was warning you guys that Access is a live update system. So as I enter in data, that's being saved automatically, and that save here that you're looking at has nothing to do with it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right, cool.
With the auto number format, can we change the numbering? So I wanted card Kent to be number 1 instead. Does that cause an issue?
Yes, that does cause an issue. You cannot. Because this is an auto number field, if I try and highlight this and type in a number, as I type in a number, this is a good time where we can reference this bottom left status bar. Do you see how it says control cannot be edited? It's bound to an auto number field, meaning the system is creating that number. You cannot change it. And in fact, once you delete a number, it will not reuse that number. So if I were to go in here and highlight this column and delete, let's actually talk about how to delete a row. A couple different ways, but really the easiest way is to just highlight the row and you can right click and go to delete record. Or you can, on your keyboard, you can click delete. That'll do it too. Yeah. So if I click delete like that, it's going to confirm you're about to delete a record. Now let's say I say yes. And now let's say I start typing in another name, Peter Parker again. It's going to default to the next number. It's not going to reuse that 3 because that 3 was already saved and deleted, and it knows in the background, although you're not really going to have access to the log, if you will, but there is a log that kind of keeps track of, hey, there was a 3 and we deleted it. So I can't reassign 3. It keeps it that way. It keeps it as even more unique than even you would expect it to, if you will. So that auto number field really does clue you in on the fact that if I were to save this here, like, and add this Peter Parker thing in here, now you know that, yeah, I have 3 names in here, but I used to have a number 3 in there, and I deleted it. But yeah, you cannot change this number once it's been assigned. Okay. Any questions on that? We can also, we can reorder these fields on the screen here. We can click and drag if we want to reorder the columns. So that is possible. It will not change the order in the design view though, so I typically don't like to do it that way, but you can. And again, obviously, we talked about all these options. Text filters, I want to point out. I think this is basically just like Excel. You know, if it equals something, you can like look for specific either pieces of things or exact matches, things like that. Okay. All right. So that's, I think, everything on tables that we want to cover here. Any other questions about that? Okay. Let's do another table. I want to start entering in the next table, which will bring us to another concept. So I'm going to close out of this table. We can save the layout. Again, that's the layout, not the table itself. So there's our table. Let's enter a new table, and let's start with the phone numbers table. So I'm going to go over here to create again, create tab, table design, and let's start making the phone numbers table. So in our structure here, we obviously did not have an auto number field because this is our foreign key that linked back to this. So the first thing I want to do is create an auto number field because, as I mentioned, every table must always have an auto number field or a unique field. That's going to be huge. So I'm going to create the first field in here, which I understand is not in here, but we would create it. Let's call it phone number ID. And over here on data type, we're going to select auto number. And while I'm here, I will highlight this row and click on primary key. Okay. Let's go to the next field that we're going to add, and that is now going to be contact ID. Now, this is the foreign key, meaning that this does not need to be auto-assigned. This is going to be just a number, just a regular number that links back to this value here. Now, we talked about number before, but when it comes to numbers, which is right here in Access, it's actually a little bit more complicated and takes a slightly more detailed approach. There's one other thing we have to do, and that is we're going to introduce the bottom portion here of this table structure layout design view, which is this properties section at the bottom here, field properties. And you see down here under general, field size, it says long integer. There's actually a few options here for the type of number. So within number, there's actually a few different types of numbers. Let's look at a quick slide. And that's kind of why I had this star here, because within numbers, there's actually a few different types, although really you're only going to use a couple of them. I suggest, well, let's start with what they are. So there's integer, which is a whole number, but it has a limit. So a good use for integer would be something like, let's say you had poll results and you knew everyone was going to enter in a number between 1 and 10. You know, like you were asking a bunch of people on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate whatever, things like that. If you know that the number that you're going to enter or the number that's in that data column has a range, use integer. If you don't think it will have a range, and it could be any number, whole number, then use long integer. And if it's anything else, with any decimal, any percentage, whatever it is, use double. Remember, we're not using currency. Double is just the standard for anything other than a whole number. Okay? So of those three then, coming back here, when we're creating this contact ID, because contact ID could really be any number, right? As we have more and more contacts, imagine a data set that continues growing, right? There's no limit to how many contacts we could have in this table, really. So technically, then there's no limit to what this number can be. So when we select number here, we want to make sure to select long integer, which is what it automatically defaults to, so that's good. So we're going to leave it as long integer. Next is phone. And phone is actually going to be text, as I'm sure you've maybe run into this in Excel. But number should only be used if you're going to be doing any kind of calculation on it, potentially. A phone number is not really a number, it's really text, especially because you can have things in there like extensions and things like that. So for phone, I would leave that as text. And then type, let's assume that we didn't break it out, and so type here would also be text. Again, neither of these are going to exceed 255 characters, so we don't need to move it to memo. So we can just leave it as text. Any questions on that number field? So with that, let's also look at the other cool things we could do at the bottom and introduce some more field properties. I talked a little earlier when we talked about Excel and the differences between Excel and Access. We talked about how we can build in some validation rules directly into data tables. Let's take a look at some of the features down below, and that's where we can do it. So here we have decimal places. So if you do use double for a dollar amount, let's say, you would use double here, and you can designate how many decimal places you want. I usually leave it on auto though. Let it decide. I don't think it. I'd rather not it not format for me, but just to let you know that you do have that option as part of this. Input mask. Have you guys ever used input masks in Excel? So for something like phone number, it can actually be really convenient as long as you don't have international numbers. This actually works really well. You can go to input mask here, and you can see on the right it uses the little ellipses here, the 3 dots on the right. You can just click that. It will ask you to save first. Let's say yes. And because we have not yet saved this table, let's give it a name. So this is TBL phone number. At least that's what I'm going to call it. Click OK. And so here's our input mask wizard. And so if this is a phone number, there's a phone number input mask. And we just step through it and say, yep, that's the one, but we can use it, as you can see, for zip codes and social security numbers, all kinds of stuff here, okay? And then we can do it. And then the only thing it's going to ask here is, do you want to store the data with the parentheses and the dash or without? You can store the data either way for a phone number. But a cool feature in Access, it will let you store it either way, but it'll display it formatted because of the input mask. So let's say we want to store it with, and say next and finish. So you can see it fills in this input mask here below. Caption is basically I'd never use caption. That's the best way to describe it. It will override the column name, and then you won't be able to know which is the column name and which is the caption. I typically just don't use that. It's a good idea not to use that. Default value. A default value you can enter in so that every time a new row gets entered, this will default to something. This is helpful for like true false fields. You can have it always default to false or always default to true. Or for example, you can have a date entered column and have the default value be the current day and time. That's convenient as well. Validation rule and validation text. This is just like in Excel. If you've used it there, it works here as well. In validation rule, you enter a rule, and then if it breaks the rule, the validation text is what pops up. Which brings us to one of the most powerful things in Access, which is built-in formulas. Under validation rule, and I don't know how strong you guys all are in Excel, but if you're very comfortable writing formulas in Excel, any formula that you can think of in Excel probably exists in Access as well. And the syntax for it could be the same, it could be a little bit different. But the great thing about Access is it will guide you through it. There's a wizard for writing formulas. And so if I click on validation rule, I'm going to click on the little ellipses here on the right again, and it's going to bring up what's called an expression builder here. And you can see, I'm going to show you in this tree structure, under functions, built-in functions, these are all of the formulas that are built into Access. And what's awesome about these, like for example, this is absolute value. What's crazy about this is at the bottom, it will tell you, first of all, what it's doing, returns a value of the same type, basically telling you, hey, this is going to be the absolute value. But in addition, it gives you the syntax. In other words, it tells you how to write the formula. So you can click up here into your little formula bar, and you can click on the formula, and that will bring up a little Access help to explain things to you, so you can bring that up. Or now that you can see how the formula is written, you can come up here and actually write the formula yourself. And so this is a really great thing. We're not going to go into formulas today too much. That's more on when we talk about doing analysis and things like that. But I really want to just point out to let you know that there are some really great features built right in here with the syntax telling you how to write the formula and what the formulas do. And they're grouped by category as well here. So like if you think of things like, if you do a lot of text parsing, you can do things like left and right and mid and things like that. Okay, I'm going to cancel out here because we're not going to do that today, but I just wanted to point that out. Required. Is this a required field? If you set this to yes, you can make it so that nobody can enter a value into this table unless this column is filled in. Allow zero length is basically, are you allowing it, can it be blank basically? Index, we'll come back to that concept a little bit later, but yeah, we'll come back to that later. And then the rest of these I've literally never used in the 15 years I've been doing Access databases. So don't worry about any of those. But these are the field properties down below, and they are specific to whichever column or whichever field I am highlighted above. So right now you can see it's highlighted on phone, so that's the one I'm on. If I click into type, it's a brand new set of properties. Each field has its own set of properties, okay? And so that's sort of the more advanced features of those fields down below. And again, this is in design view of this table that we've just been setting up. Okay, any questions on the number field type and those subtypes, long integer, integer, and double that we use? And then any questions on some of these other things?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could you please increase your screen size? We can't see any of it.
You can't see any of the bottom piece?
Can you increase your font a little bit? Your font size?
Access does not have a default font size here.
Could you go into your resolution?
Yeah, I can change it that way. Sure, just 1 second.
Yeah, so change it to 800 by 600 so everything is just bigger. Oh, that's probably why.
Yeah, just 1 second here.
By 600.
How's that?
Maybe 1280 by 960? That's
Yeah.
a little bit close.
Yeah, that might be a little too big. Hold on a second.
There you go.
How's that?
Much better. Much better.
All right, no problem. Let me actually just change it though so it doesn't stretch it as much. 1 second. All right, how about that?
All right, excellent.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So any questions on that? Can you guys see this bottom section now? All right. Did you want me to review those again now that you can see that section?
I think we're okay. I understood the concept is just not being able to see it directly.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so great. That takes care of that. So now that we've had all, we can kind of see all that, I think it's time for all of you folks to now try it with a sample data set on your own. So what I'm going to do is actually in the GoToWebinar toolbar there's a section called Handouts, and I'm going to send you all a sample file. Let me open it up on screen first so you can see it. This is a sample file with just some sample data in it that has a number of columns here. And what I'd like you all to do, I'm going to send this over to you guys, what I'd like you all to do is in that sample database that you currently have, go ahead and try and set up a table as though you were going to set it up for that table structure. So if you look in the little handout section, there should be a file that just got posted there called samplefile.xlsx. And you should be able to download that file and view it. And what I like to do in Access is go to create a new table, and in design view, set up the table with the correct, pick your own column names that make sense based on what we talked about, trying to avoid spaces, and then also making sure to select the correct data types. And I will leave on screen this list of data types that we had to give you a frame of reference. But why don't we take a few minutes here and let you guys all try it on your own to to set that up, and then we can all review it together as a group. Once we'll give you maybe 5-10 minutes or something, and you guys can all do it, and we'll try it together.
Where did he send it? Do you have yours open?
Oh, yeah. So it's in the webinar?
In the webinar. I can go to back to the webinar. So in the webinar, you click on the top right up here.
Can you guys all see that sample file handout?
Everybody, if you're not sure to do it, you'll see on the top right of your webinar, you'll see that little red arrow. Click on that one, and when it opens up, you'll see sample file XLSX. Double click on that.
So when you click on it, the arrow is going to be pointing to the left. Once you click on it, it goes to the right. You're going to see something that says handouts. Click on the handouts, and then another pop-up will come up, and it will say the sample file. Click on the file name, and then it'll download.
We're using Access 2013, by the way, so to open it up is a little bit different for a blank database.
Okay.
So I'm assuming you just have to click on the blank database desktop.
Yep, blank database. You still have to pick, I think, where it goes, and then you can just put it on your desktop. If you weren't following along earlier when we created the new database, then yeah, just build a new database, call it whatever you want, training or whatever. Put it on your desktop or anywhere you want, and then try and create this table structure. Yep.
Mine opened up, well, I'm talking for myself, and everyone else uses 2013 as well. Mine opened up to a blank database that says Table 1 with ID at the top, and I click to add. It's not in design view, it's in the standard view.
Right. So
how do I go to design view?
So when you first open up and create a brand new database, the first thing it tries to do is create a new table for you in datasheet view. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just close that table. So you can right click on the tab at the top of it and just go to close, and then just go to the create tab and just start a brand new table and go to design view.
Awesome.
We're actually going through that open access.
I suppose in theory, or you can right click on the tab of table 1 and then click on design view, but you want to start in design view. That's where you want to set up the table.
Basically, it opens up an initial table for us, and then we can close that one, just create our own table and rename it.
Exactly. Create your own new table and name it later, and rename it, and then set up the tables. And really, what we're trying to do, what you want to practice, is setting up the structure there, using the create tab, and then selecting the correct data types for each column in that sample file, and then we will review, make sure everybody has the right data types.
So in this case, should I create this as one table, or should I consider looking at a different table?
Yeah, no. We're not going to split it up. Let's just create it as one big table for now.
Okay.
Just to practice the data types and getting used to creating the table, picking out the data types, and setting up the structure. We don't have to worry about splitting it up, because I think for our purposes, I recognize that you guys aren't going to be creating a lot of tables. I feel like a lot of the stuff is either already going to be in a database for you, or you're going to import it, and I'll show you. We're going to go cover importing a little bit later. But I think it's important to understand what those data types are, and setting up a new table on your own is just a great practice tool.
So what should I enter here? Winning name? What should I enter as the field name? Here's our data set on the right side. Order ID, employee. What should I enter as the one winning? Should just do order ID? And based on the data type, which should my first data type be?
what they wanted first is
I think they wanted
find it
auto
by,
number,
and that's
auto
the
number
auto
first
number.
one. Next. For this one, it's under 255, so I'm going to go short text. Does that sound right?
And for what it's worth, I'm assuming in this sample spreadsheet that I gave you guys, let's pretend that order ID is going to be your auto number. I'll give you a quick hint. Let's just pretend that was a system, that we want that to be a system generated number.
That one's underscore, huh?
I'm playing it more messy than that. So for ship date, I want to use date as well, I'm assuming. Ship via short text. Short text. And this one might be what? Right, that's what I would pick. Cool. What should I do for this one? Ideas?
Text.
For text?
Yep, but you want numbers to be text now. Can you use space one? Or forward?
You can?
You can use a forward slash?
I'm not sure if we can use a forward. Stan, is there any issue using a forward slash in our input?
You're talking about for a data field type or the data field name?
Data field name.
Forward slash?
Yeah, is there issues?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
thought. You want that to be a number? Or is it just gonna be a text? No, yeah.
Either one.
Either one, yeah.
They'll be ignored.
But in this case, I'm going to change the format to what though? It's just one place.
Just leave it at auto, it should recognize it.
Phone number.
Yeah.
In this case, what format should I go with? Just anyone?
Currency,
Double.
Sorry. Doesn't want to use currency. So I should probably go.
It has to be double.
Excellent. That's what I'd probably go with. What should I do for now? What was one was memo and there was one that was
Memo was anything over 260,
255 or something like that?
5 or something like that, yeah.
Alright, everybody? Seem right?
How are we doing? Do we need a few more minutes?
Anybody else on the call feel like they need some more time?
Any more time?
Ready to go.
No? Okay. All right, great. Let's review it. I don't know what you guys called it, but I'm going to call it table TBL sample. But let's take a look at what we have here. So I'm going to bring up the structure here, and I'll bring up the Excel file side by side, and we'll see what we got. So let's start with order ID. As I mentioned, kind of gave away as a hint. Let's just pretend that that's an auto number. So you can see I've made auto number, the order ID, and also how many of you guys made sure to remember to click the primary key button at the top to make sure that that's your primary key. Next up, employee. That's going to be text because that's just the name. Customer, that's also just text. Order date and shipped date, I have as date time. Ship via and ship name, those should both be text. Ship email address, I have as a hyperlink because we have email addresses in there. Hopefully you guys got that. The address fields are all basically all text. Address, city, state, zip. The one thing you could have done that would not have been wrong, although I don't typically do it this way, is I usually leave, you could have made this a number, but I typically make it as text because you're not going to do math on it. So really there's no reason for it to be a number. I understand that there are numbers in it, but really there's no reason for it to be a number. So I typically make zip codes text as well. Country, region, also text. Shipping fee. I understand I tried to trick you here a little bit by putting it in as currency on the spreadsheet. Hopefully under shipping fee you made it a number, and then in the properties you set it as double. Also, as I've been going through these, I don't know how you've named them. Again, you could use underscores, but hopefully you have not used spaces in your column names. You can see I just used the lowercase, uppercase type of a combination, but if you used underscores here between the words, that's fine too. As long as you didn't put spaces, I think that's good. So shipping fee should be a number with double down below. Taxes should also be a number with double down below. Payment type, text. Because again, these aren't more than 255 characters. Paid date, date time. Notes, on the other hand, hopefully you guys caught this one because notes can really be as long as they want. Hopefully you set those up as a memo field, meaning that there is no limit to the text. And then lastly, status should be text. Did everybody get that? Any questions on any of those? Any ones where maybe tripped you up or you were a little confused? Anything like that?
On notes, I think I actually did text with long text. Is there a difference to that? Just doing memo is better.
You're in 2013, right?
Correct.
2013 long text. Does it have the? I'm not in 2013 right now. In 2013, I believe, is there a memo on there too, or is it just long text?
I think it's just long text.
Yeah, I think long text replaced memo in 2013. So then all of the text you have should be short text, and then the memo should be your long text. If you're in 2013. Okay. Any other questions, or anyone else get tripped up on any of these, or get confused or anything like that? Awesome. All right. So save this table if you want, TBL sample or wherever you want to save it as. And so if you followed along with us this whole time, you should have 3 tables on the left here. Now, I'd like to point out that it does default these tables to be sorted alphabetically. You can change the sorts by right-clicking on the access objects here at the top, and you can see here there's a sort by. You can do sort by name. You could sort ascending, descending, sort by when you created it or when you last modified it. You can do some cool stuff here as well. So that's the right-click on the All Access Objects tab, as opposed to clicking on that little arrow, which is a different kind of a menu.
If you didn't give it a name and you just left it as table 1, how would you go back and change it from table 1?
So have you already saved it?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, no problem. We can rename tables. 2 different ways to do it. If you click on the table itself on the left and then click F2 on the keyboard, it will take you into the kind of the text mode, and you can rename it to something else. Alternatively, you can right-click on the table and go to rename. And that'll take you into the text, and you can type in something different. Okay? Good question. Okay, so we've all practiced this, and now we all know how to create tables. We know about our data types. But I think for your purposes, obviously, data entry, you're not going to be doing data entry of tables. You're probably not going to be setting up your own tables. Instead, you're going to be doing some imports. So let's talk about how to actually import data tables in that are in Excel already. So hopefully this sample file that you have has been saved somewhere. So if it's on your desktop, or if not, it should still be in that little handout section, or if you're in Excel here, just file save as and save it somewhere onto your desktop. I will do the same. Okay, and now let's practice an import. So if everyone wants to follow along, if you remember, import exists under the external data tab, which is the 3rd tab along the top on the ribbon, or at least it is in 2010. And under import, we're going to select Excel. It's going to bring up a box. It's going to ask us what the file name is first, so I'm going to just browse to my desktop and click that sample file. And we're going to leave this radio button under import. Now, one of the things I want to point out to you here is that you can also, if you're importing, let's say, 10 Excel files, and all 10 Excel files are exactly the same columns and all the same type, formatted exactly the same, instead of importing it into 10 separate tables, you can actually import and automatically append or add the records from the import into an existing table. And that's what this is, this other option. You select what table you want, it'll automatically import it into that table. I'm not going to do that for now. We're just going to click on that first one, which is to import into a new table, but just wanted to let you know, be aware of that option. Once you click on OK, it's going to bring up a view of the table that you're trying to import. And it's going to ask you If the first row contains column headers, it's going to guess on your behalf. In this case, it does. And so we're going to leave that checked and click next. And now, whereas when we create a table, we create our structure, right? Same thing here. We're importing and we have to tell it what the structure is. So for each column, we're going to click and you can see it highlights each column. And as we go through, we want to look at this data type section to make sure it's picking the right type. Now the key here is though that when you import, as opposed to when you set up from scratch, you cannot import a value into AutoNumber, which if you think about it, it makes sense because if you recall, and that was actually one of your guys' questions, can you override the AutoNumber and change it to something? And I told you cannot do that. Well, same idea. You cannot import and make it an AutoNumber when there's already numbers in there. So in this case, we would make this just a number, which in this case would be long integer, right? Because it could be any number. So I would make that a long integer field. And then as I go through, I can make sure that the data types are what I want it to be. And you can see what Access is going to do here. It's going to automatically guess for you. A lazy person would say, oh, I'm sure it's right. And I'll show you in a second an example where that can lead you astray. So I strongly advise you when you import, although Access will guess, I will tell you that you should go through and make sure it's picking the right data types here, okay? So text, text. See, for example here, shipping fee, it's trying to set it to currency. I would always come back and change this to double. So we would set these to double for the dollars amount, just like what we just set up as the structure, okay? Notes, it will try and set it to text. In this case, we would change it to memo, or in your case, long text, if you're in 2013. So once you go through all these columns, I want to also point out a couple options here. The one big one here is do not import. When you import a table from Excel, it will give you the option to skip certain columns if you want. This is helpful if, for example, you had a spreadsheet that had a spacer column that was blank. You can just skip that column because you don't want it to be part of your ultimate table. So it is nice to have this feature, but if your data is in a very nice clean table, like it was in this case in Excel, you won't be using that check marks. So hopefully you can go through this and set all these up. So long integer should be order ID. I'll review these again. Employee should be text. Customer should be text. Order date and ship date are both date time. Ship via text, short text if you're in 2013. Ship name, short text. Email address, I skipped that one. That one can be hyperlink. Ship address, text. Ship city, text or short text. Same thing for state. Same thing for zip. Country as well. All of those are short text or text. Shipping fee and taxes should both be double. Payment type should be text. Paid date, date time. Notes should be long text or memo. And then status is text. Once you've set up all of those, click on next at the bottom. And now here's the primary key question. Because we could not set up that order ID to be a primary key, Access will ask you here, okay, well, great. Would you like to have Access create a primary key for you? Or even though order ID is not an auto number, we can technically set it up as the primary key. The only difference would be that when we add a new row, it will not automatically create a new number. So it's up to you how you want to handle that. If you want Access to have its own ID field that does an auto number, then you would leave it as let Access add primary key. Or you can click on choose my own primary key and then select which field it is. In this case, it's the first one, order ID, so you can do that. I would strongly advise you to never use this no primary key option because you always want every table to have a primary key. And so it's either the existing, one of the fields existing or just let Access create its own. I'll just let Access create its own. And click Next. And then it's just going to ask you what you want to name this table. I'm going to call this TBL sample import. It will try and default the name to the name of the Excel file or tab that you were importing. So I like to just create it right off the bat with my TBL naming standard. So you add in the TBL or the name and then click Finish. Hopefully you guys were with me on all that. You can see it'll give you a nice little summary, finished importing. Here's where's the path of the file. And then it's imported that into table, what I called it. You can save import steps, which is an interesting feature. I'm not going to cover this dramatically, but you can check this box. So the next time if you need to import the same table over and over again, it is not really common that you would do that unless you have, it's just not common for you to have to do that in this instances, and so I'm not going to really cover that, but just know that you can do that. And I'm just going to click Close, and you can see now we have our table sample import, and if I double click, I can take a look, and there's our table with all of the data that we just imported. Was anyone not able to follow along with that and import that? Okay, I'd like to now show you what will happen if there was an error or an issue. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to go into that sample file. Excuse me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use this sample file because it'll be fun. I'm going to create a new field here called date added. And this you guys can just kind of watch just to kind of show you what's going to happen here. And I'm going to put in today's date. And I'm going to fill it all the way down, but on one of these rows, I'm going to put in a letter, which obviously does not make sense here, but I'm going to just do that. And I'm going to try and import this file into my Access database. And I'm going to show you what happens if you try and import it and set up the wrong values, the wrong data types. Okay, so I'm going to import this file, and there's that file that I was just showing you, that sample file with the phone numbers. And I'm going to say first row contains headings. And I'm going to set this up as text, text, text. And, you know, I thought that this is a date added, so I'm going to set it up as date and time, right? Because I thought that these are all dates. Imagine some huge spreadsheet, right, where you can't actually see every row, and maybe you're not going to look through it. But you look at the first 10 rows and you see a date, so you're like, oh, well, that must be a date column, right? What happens if you try and import something like this? What does Access do? So I'm going to come over here and click Next, and I'm just going to import it as TBL sample error. And when I click Finish, take a look at what this message says this time. It says finished importing, but then it says error. It says not all of your data was successfully imported. Error descriptions with associated row numbers, and basically telling you, hey, something went wrong, and I'm going to tell you what. So when I click on Close, you're going to notice that although I have this table sample error that I imported, there's also this field, this table that was created by Access as well. And it has this underscore import errors. So what that's telling me is we take a look at this, and it's going to let us know. I'm going to double click on this, and what happened? It's going to give you an error, and it's going to show you, hey, there was what's called a type conversion failure. And what that means is it was trying to take data and put it into a data type, and it had it failed on one of those. And in this case, the field that was affected is date added, and it was on row 9 of the data. So if I now open table sample error, I can see here there's my date added, and look at row 9. Look at what happened. It could not assign a date time value to that cell, I guess. And so instead, it imported it all, but it left it blank. So I lost data. So when you import, and it's really important to look at that screen at the end when you click on Finish to see if there were any errors. And if there are, what's great is that import errors table will tell you what the error was. What do you do when that happens? Well, what I suggest is a couple things. You want to investigate. The good thing is it told me what row it was on, so I can go back to my original file and take a look at the row 9 and imagine an Excel file with hundreds of thousands of rows. That'll narrow it down for me, right? And I can see exactly where the errors are. And I can go back to my original Excel file and fix those errors. So that is a way to investigate those errors and do that. That is the other reason it's really important to select the right data types, because it will tell you if any data is wrong. If I were to have selected text instead of date added here, it would have imported this with no problem, because technically this is text, even though it happens to also be a date, and it would have imported it just fine, and I would never know that there was this A missing here. So when it comes to numbers and dates, you want to really make sure you're picking the right thing it should be, or what you think it should be, so that when you import it, if you get an error, that's actually great information for you. And this import errors table that will be created by Access itself is really, will really help you investigate and figure out what the issue is. Okay. Any questions on how to import a table? Okay, great. Well, we know how to get data in. How do we get data out? A couple different ways to do that. Although there is this export section at the top here of our external data tab on the ribbon here, we can actually just right-click on one of these tables, and you can see there is an option here to export. I like to use this because it's easier than the ribbon at the top, but that way I can pick exactly what table I want. So I just pick the table, I right-click, I go to export, and then I'm assuming most of the time you're going to be exporting to Excel. And so if we click on Excel, it's just going to ask us where do we want to put it and what format. Usually it's going to be the newest version of Excel. You can export with formatting and layout. I typically uncheck that and leave it blank. That way it's just raw data, nice and clean and neat. And what you want to call the table, so TBL sample, let's say, you can just click OK. And that's it. It's really a one-step, two-step wizard, super easy to use. And it just created that file. I can open it up, but there it is. That table was the one that we set up that had no data in it. But there you go, just created the nice raw data table with all the columns on it. So exporting is super easy. So you can get data out, you can get data in. So let's talk about some more navigational things. Now that we have a bunch of tables in here, there are some other things we can do, and I want to just point those out so that you're familiar with them. We have a bunch of tables. We can copy tables and paste them right in to the same database or to another database. Just like in other places, Control-C for copy does work, or we can right-click on a table and go to Copy. So for example, table sample doesn't have anything in it, but let's say table contact. If I right-click on table contact and go to Copy, I can then right-click right into this same area and go to Paste. And what it's going to ask me when I copy a table, there's a couple options. You can copy the structure and the data. That's a true copy of the table. It's going to ask you what you want to name it. Let's name it, for example, TBL contact _ copy. So if you do it like this with structure and data, it is a true copy of the table as a whole. So if I look at table contact copy, you can see it's exactly the same. I can also copy a table, but only the structure of the table, not the data itself. Super useful sometimes. So if I go to copy here and then right-click back in and click on paste, structure only, and I'll call this table contact copy structure, and say OK. And you can see if we look at that and double-click into that, it's the same table, but there's no data. To give you some examples of when this can be useful, let's say you have a data table that has a great layout. Maybe it has a lot of columns and you spent a bunch of time perfecting the structure of it all. And maybe after you imported it, let's say, maybe you want to do another import after you've made some fixes. What you can do is copy a table as just the structure, right? And now you have a table structure with no data in it, and then go into the import section and import the data right into that blank structure. That's a great way to do an import that's maybe a little bit more on the tricky side when you have a lot of columns that you had to really investigate and play with and figure out what the right data types are. You can really use that. So copying tables and copying just the structures, great tools there. You can also open simultaneously multiple tables. I've been doing one at a time so far, but there is no reason you can't double click on table contact and double click on table contact copy. It will create two different tabs at the top here. Let's just do one that has different stuff in it. Table phone number. So each one of these is represented by a tab, just like in Excel. So you can have multiple tables open, and when you want to close any one of them, just remember you can go to the top and right click and go to close, and now this close all feature makes more sense because that will close all the tabs. I'm about to show you guys something that I do in every database because I feel like looking at this tabbed view is very annoying. Because if I want to compare data across multiple tables, this just doesn't work. It's really annoying to do. And there's a feature in Access. It's unfortunate that it is not the default, but I'm going to show you a feature. So I'm going to close these tables for now. So I'm just going to go to right-click, close all. I'm going to go to File. It's kind of buried, unfortunately. But I'm going to go to File, and then I'm going to go to Options at the bottom. And then I'm going to go to Current Database. And 2013, I'm not sure if it's the same or not. Maybe you guys can tell me if you guys can find this in 2013 as well. But you want to go to Options and Current Database. Do you guys have that? And over on here in the section, there's a Document Window Options. You can see tabbed documents is how it's currently defaulted to. I like to look at things with something called overlapping windows instead. So if I check overlapping windows, before I close out, is there anyone that didn't get to this options screen here?
It's default in 2013, overlapping windows is.
We don't have to worry about that.
Oh.
We could minimize.
So they got my emails then. No, I'm just kidding. Good, because I have tabbed, in 2010 it defaulted tabbed and it's awful. In overlapping windows, which is the way it should be, which is great, you have to close and reopen the database to view it that way. But it is the much better way to do it because of then you can actually have, where was I? Because then when you open two different tables, it actually opens them in overlapping windows, which you can rearrange. So if you already have that, then great. You guys are ahead of the game. So then all the stuff I talked about with tabbed and how to close that doesn't really make sense, but you can still right-click at the top of the window and all those options appear there. So overlapping windows is definitely the best way to go. So are you guys all across the board on 2013, or are some of you on 2010?
All of us from 2013.
Oh, awesome. Okay, great. So that's overlapping windows, and if that's the default, then that's great. Okay. Any questions on copying and pasting objects and tables and opening and closing and importing and exporting? We got all that. So we understand everything there is to know basically about tables, and now we can now talk about how tables work together. So we started the day today talking all about relationships and how a database is a set of multiple data tables that are all somehow related, right? Well, how do we actually see that relationship and how do we visualize that? I'm going to bring in a couple tables into this database that are basically imports of the what our tables would have been for table contact and table phone number, which is basically right from Excel, okay? So this is these two tables that we had already created. I just have it with all the data filled in, okay?
Okay, general question.
Yes.
Notice that you already have like 7 tables or 8 tables already on your side, and that's just you creating a couple small tables here and there. For us, we have, feels like 50 plus of these things. So to find one particular table, it can be kind of difficult. Is there a way to search within a table
search bar.
For a contact ID, for example, if I'm looking for just contact ID, or I'm looking for just phone number, can I search within a table for that from the search bar?
Yeah, great question. We're actually about to see something that will help you do that. Yeah. It won't give you the search option so much, but it will give you a visual on your tables. If it's, and hopefully it's set up, and if it isn't set up, then you'll want to set that up on your existing database, because it'll be huge and it'll pay itself forward a lot when it comes to the analysis piece of it. Because I know exactly what you mean, right? You know you have some data in some table, but you have like 100 tables. Where's that data, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll show you that right now. So I have these two tables as a simple example. How do we create this relationship in contact ID between these two tables? Because really that's the relationship, right, between these names and these phone numbers. Now we're going to do the analysis in the next session, but I want to set up how we want to visualize the relationships that exist between these tables today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close both these tables for now, and we're going to go into a section that we mentioned earlier of the advanced features, which is database tools. And in database tools, there's a section called relationships, which is great. No, this is not a history of every person you've dated. This is actually a place to look at all the tables. And it's going to bring up, if you have not set this up yet for your existing database, then you're going to want to do it. And it's going to show you all of the tables in the database like this if you have not set it up already. I'm going to just pick out the two tables that I know I want, which is table contact and table phone number. I'm going to click on table contact and add, and then table phone number and add, and I'm going to close this. Now take a look at what it's done. This is a visual representation of our tables, where within each box where I have the table name, I am being shown a list of the fields that are contained inside that table. So to your point, now I can see, oh, this table contains the phone number. That's where it is. Okay? And look at what else is really nice about this view. I have a little key icon. So all that time that we spent in setting up the primary key, that now I can visually see which column is the unique column. Now, one of the things that we did also earlier that I just sort of instinctively did is I named contact ID here and here the same name. That is obviously really important because I'm going to be able to understand that that is the same value in both. So I have these two tables that are represented by these boxes. Now, I'm not looking at the data, I'm looking at the representation of the structure of the table. So now I want to create a relationship between these two. Let me show you how to do that. Now we know that the field that we want to create the relationship on is contact ID, right? In other words, if we thought of in Excel, if you were doing a VLOOKUP, you would VLOOKUP on contact ID. So how do we do that here? Well, this is going to be the last time you write a VLOOKUP as far as databases go, because what you're going to do is we're going to go over here to contact ID. I'm going to highlight contact ID by clicking on it once. And then I'm going to click and hold to drag, and I'm going to drag it across into contact ID over here on the right and drop it off. And you guys can do this. I know you don't have all the data, but you still have these tables set up, I hope. If not, just follow along on screen here. And so you can see here it's asking me, okay, what's the relationship? Well, it's table contact has table contact ID. So table contact ID and table contact is being related to contact ID and table phone number. There are some options. I'll come right back to these, but I just want to show you what happens first if we just click create based on the default options. I'm going to click create, and it's going to create a line. This line is a visual representation of what in essence is a VLOOKUP for you in Excel. And unfortunately, obviously time-wise, we don't have time to go into analysis today. We'll do that in the next session. But when we go into the analytics, you will see that by creating this relationship like this up front, when we do analytics, these two tables will be in essence linked and merged. There's a relationship between them so that when we are doing analysis, we can combine the data from the two tables and merge them into one ultimate data set. In other words, if we look at our spreadsheet here, we can go from, let me delete this, we can go from data that looks like this, right? Because we have two separate tables, and we can get back to something that looks like this when we need to do analytics. And we don't need to do a VLOOKUP to do it. All we need to do is set up this relationship. And when we talk about queries, we're going to bring in these same tables, and it will already have both pieces of data combined for us. We do not need to write a formula. There is no VLOOKUP. All of that is done with simply that drag and drop maneuver that I just did. So in your world where we have existing databases with many tables, we can have many linkages like this, creating a visual map of the data, showing us how all of the pieces relate. Once we look at that, we can talk about what that looks like. But, for example, you could have customers and orders and items and price sheets and, all of that stuff. And all of those will be represented in their individual pieces by these tables, and then they'll all have linkages connecting them all together.
And okay. Our contact ID in the second table, phone number, now the foreign key?
Yes, exactly. Now, there is no visual little icon for foreign key. The little key icons only exist for primary keys. But yes, by definition, this is a primary key, and therefore this is a foreign key. Okay, so let's go back into the settings and see what else was in here. I can click on the little line here. You can see it turns to bold. If I double click on the line, I can bring back this relationships dialog box here to take a look at some additional features. And what we're going to talk about here now is the different types of joins. Because what I've done here is called an inner join. And if your data is clean and self-explanatory like it is here, the default type of join works perfectly. And what I mean by that is, do you notice how for every person that we have here, we have at least one phone number here? So if we were to do a merge of this data, you can see that it completely overlaps. If we think of like a Venn diagram, the data in here completely overlaps with the data in here. We have 5 different numbers here on the left in contact ID and 5 unique different numbers in here. So when we talk about the join that we have here, this straight line, we can click on join type and take a look, and you'll see that there are actually 3 different types of joins. Let's review those in a quick slide. So we have 3 different types of joins. And the first and most obvious default join, which is the one that it does by default and the one that we currently have set up in that join that we did, is called an inner join. And what it does is it matches data from both data sets. So if we were to look at a Venn diagram, instead of it, the inner join is the intersection of the two. But if the 2 tables have exactly the same data as far as the primary key and foreign key is concerned, then really these 2 overlap completely. And so an inner join is the one that makes sense, and it will show us data from both data sets. Now there are some instances, however, where we will need to use what's called an outer join. And there are 2 types of outer join that really are the same. It's just looking from a different perspective. An outer join on A, or really what's called a left outer join, is it's going to show you everything from data set A and only bring over data that matches from B. What that means is, visually, an outer join A is going to basically take all of table A, even stuff that doesn't match table B, but it's going to start with everything in A and only bring over stuff in B. The analogy in VLOOKUPs is, have you ever run a VLOOKUP and you write your VLOOKUP, and then all of a sudden you get to something where it gives you that error, which tells you that it could not find an item? Well, an outer join will retain that and show you that same thing, whereas an inner join would not, because an inner join is going to only show you things that are in both data sets. So an inner join could potentially ultimately result in fewer data rows than what you were expecting. Let me show you what that looks like looking at the very simple Excel file that we have here. Excuse me. So because we have a perfect overlap here, an inner join would give us everything, and we would look like this as a result. But let's say, for example, we took something like Tony Stark, which has a row here, and let's say we deleted this row. And let's pretend that that row is not in there. That means that there are no contact phone numbers in here because we deleted this row. Let's just delete it like that. There are no contact phone numbers in here for Tony Stark, which means that if we were to do an inner join, the Venn diagram for these two data sets now do not overlap and now actually look like this. Right? So if we were to do an inner join, Tony Stark is out here in table A, but he has no phone numbers. So our inner join would not include Tony Stark. And our resulting data set, when we do the join after our VLOOKUP type analysis, would not include this row. And we would not even see that Tony Stark is in here. So an inner join, you can lose data. And this concept, it's a little tricky with joins because we're calling them joins and not VLOOKUPs. And we can lose data along the way. We're really going to solidify it when we talk about queries and analysis. So don't worry if you don't 100% see it, because we'll actually do the queries in the next session. But I want to introduce you to the concepts of the three different types of joins. So you can at least start getting familiar with the terminology. And so an outer join on A being table A, looks at everything though, and includes everything from A and only the things from B that match. So in that circumstance, if we were to do that type of join, then what would the result of this be when we do this join? Instead of losing Tony Stark, we would actually have him, but because he has no phone numbers, it would look like this. It would be blank because there are no phone numbers, but at least it would include Tony Stark. So an outer join retains everything from one of your data sets. An inner join only looks at the overlap. So an outer join, and we can do that same outer join from both directions, meaning from both data sets. But basically, an outer join will retain everything from one of your data sets and only bring over stuff that matches. Whereas an inner join, it's almost like a VLOOKUP, and then after the VLOOKUP, it filters out all of the stuff that has the error. Does that make sense? A little bit, sort of? So as far as access goes, and these relationships go, we can set up those joins here under join type. And that was, again, I double-click the line. And I go to join type, and these three represent those three types of joins. And let's take a look at how they've worded it in Access. It's not great, but it'll be okay. So option 1 is an inner join. Only include rows where the join fields from both tables are equal. So that is a VLOOKUP and a filter after the fact. So in this case, it would look like this if we had data that looked like this. So it removes that. Only things that are in common in both. Option 2, include all records from table contact. That's our A in this case. And only those records from table phone number where the join fields are equal. So if we chose option 2, that would result in something that looked like this. It's all records from table A, which is this. This is table A in this circumstance. So I want to see all the names and then show me the phone numbers if I have them. And so that's what I have here. Show me the phone numbers if I have them. That's join type 2 in this case. And then join type 3 is all records. It's the opposite. Show me all of the phone numbers and then only those records where table contact has a name. So what does that look like? Well, that's the opposite scenario. Let's say instead of deleting number 4 here, what if you went in and deleted Tony Stark? We have a 4 here but no 4 here. When we do our join, if we were to do this outer join, then our resulting data set would have a phone number but no name attached to it. That's an outer join of that third type, or type B. An inner join would result in the same as what we had before. It would look like that. There is no 4 in either one of those, or an inner join would ignore this row because there isn't a 4 in here as well. So that outer B, sorry, let's go back to access. So this number 3, include all records from phone number and all those, only those that are equal. That would look like, that would result in a data set that looks like this, because it has the phone number, because it takes everything from here and then only brings in the name if it has it. So as far as your VLOOKUPs go and the 3 different types, 2 and 3 are true VLOOKUPs based on one or the other data set. Whereas option 1, the inner join, which is the default, does a VLOOKUP with a filter that removes anything that did not find a match. When we talk about queries, you'll see how these resulting data sets work, and we'll do these joins again. But I think it's at least nice to introduce these concepts and the 3 different types of joins.
In your opinion, which one do most businesses need to use? Option number 1?
So, and that's a good question. How do you know which one to use? And the one that you want to use is going to be very specific to your data itself. So we have to think about it. Let's think about this. In this case, if we had contacts and phone numbers, isn't it possible to have a contact but not have a phone number for them yet? It is, right? And there are going to be times when we want to see our contacts, whether they have a phone number or not. So in this circumstance, I would recommend using the outer join like this, which is include all records from table contact, right? I don't want to lose any of my contacts as part of this join. And then I only want to include the phone numbers if I have them. And if I don't have a phone number for that person yet, no problem. I still want to see the person, right? So I would recommend number 2. However, I want to point out that this relationship that we set up is not fixed in stone. When we do our analytics, we can change it. So it is simply for the purposes of visualizing the data. And so in that sense, I like to be inclusive, so I would usually pick this one. Because let's think about the alternative. Why would you ever have a phone number that wasn't associated with a contact? That doesn't make any sense, right? You would never have a phone number that doesn't have a person attached to it. It's just a phone number just sitting off in space. That doesn't really make sense. So number 3 doesn't really make sense to me. So I would pick either 1 or 2 depending on what kind of analysis I was doing. But to be more inclusive, in this circumstance, number 2 makes sense. So it will take a little time to kind of think about which of these I want to do. But again, don't feel locked in. Don't feel like you've completely, lost anything. It is not going to actually delete any data when you do this join. This is simply what type of join you are defaulting to. Okay, it's simply a default. It is not a lock-in. It's not. You're not going to lose any of your data. Okay. So let's pick on 2. Let's pick set number 2 and see how that's visually represented. I'm going to click OK here, and you can see what it's doing is it now, instead of a line, just a straight line, it's going to add a little arrow. And the arrow means it's going that way. Visually, they're saying it's everything from table contact. This is an outer join. It's going to take table contact and force the records of table contact onto phone number. I think visually that's kind of what that arrow is trying to say. It's an outer join. If we were to do that other join type, the arrow would point in the other direction. And then as you saw when I first did it, number 1, the inner join, no arrow in either direction. But in this case, I would pick number 2. Well, again, we'll see this more. We'll review this entire thing again when we talk about queries. Okay, so that is this join type section. Oops, sorry. This is the join type. What is this stuff down here? Well, one of the things with data is we have 2 different tables, right, with contacts ID. Referential integrity is basically ensuring that as we make changes, it applies to both. Let me show you what I mean. We talked a little bit, or I just mentioned just now, how it would not make sense to have a phone number in table phone number without an associated contact in table contact. What that's called is when these two tables that are so related, right, phone number and person are so related, what that's called, if you have a phone number with no contact associated with it, it's called an orphaned record. And you sort of want to avoid that, right? How do we avoid it? Well, Access gives us a tool to avoid that. And it's referential integrity here is that tool. If we check this box, you can see at the bottom here that it gives us this option to now check the box for cascade update and cascade delete. What does that mean? I typically, cascade delete's a scary thing, but what it'll let you do is if, for example, in this example where we had this situation, here was our data, right? If I were to delete Tony Stark from table contact, it will say, well, wait a second, there's a contact ID number 4 in here. We have a relationship to this contact ID, and there's a 4 in here as well. If I cascade delete, that means if I delete this row from table contact, it will delete this row from table phone numbers. That's called cascade delete. I delete it here, it deletes it here too, because these are related. I personally don't like that. That's a scary thing to me. I would instead leave the referential integrity, which means the system knows that these are related in that way, in a very strong way, but I would leave cascade delete unchecked. And what that'll do is if I try and delete a record from table contact that has phone numbers, it will give me an error, which is really, I think, for my purposes and how I like to manage this, that's the ideal scenario. So when I set up these relationships, I click on referential integrity, but I leave these blank because I don't want these things being changed. I don't want data being changed without me knowing about it. I'd rather it give me an error on screen. And then I can go in, and if I really need to delete that contact, I'll go into table phone number, delete the phone numbers first, because that's downstream, if you will. And then I'll go in and delete table contact. Because again, the way we set this up with this join type, we can have contacts with no phone number, but we can't have phone numbers with no contact. And that's the way it makes sense to have it. So that enforced referential integrity is a great thing to check. I would leave these other two blank. Now, there's another thing that happened when I clicked on enforced referential integrity. I keep using the word strong. It's a stronger join. And the reason is now it has recognized what kind of relationship this is. You see how it says one to many here? And up here it's filled in a little one to infinity. When I enforce referential integrity, I am telling Access that these are not just related for the purposes of, just for fun. These are truly joined at the hip. And what I wanted to do is because I wanted to enforce referential integrity, I wanted to be checking for me and basically be my error checking in case to make sure I don't delete a contact without deleting its phone numbers as well. And so what it's done is it's determined what the relationship is between these tables as far as the data is concerned. So what these 1 and infinity stand for are, I can have for every one contact in table contact, I can have multiple entries in table phone number, which really is a really rough way of defining the primary key and foreign key relationship, right? When we talked way back in the day about primary key and foreign key, we talked about how it's unique here, but not necessarily unique here. I can have multiple entries here for every one entry here, right? So one Bruce Wayne here can have multiple phone numbers here. That is what's called a one-to-many relationship, and that really is just another way of saying primary key to foreign key. And so when we talk about this relationship here, this 1 to infinity, this shows up because I clicked on enforce referential integrity. So I suggest when you set up these relationships, you do check that box and make sure you pick the join type that is the most inclusive. Sometimes it'll be an inner join because that is what makes sense, because it truly is 1 to 1. Other times it will be this, where it's 1 to many. So one item in table contact relates to many or infinite in table phone number. So that really kind of brings that whole conversation of primary key and foreign key and what that really means it sort of brings it full circle into now this relationships tab. Any questions, or does that make sense? Hopefully that at least sets some groundwork on what that is and why these symbols appear and how we set up these relationships. Any questions on that? Okay. So this now is the relationships tab again within here. Relationships we do save. And if I were to click on close here at the top, you can see where it created a new ribbon. If I click close, it will ask me, do I want to save this layout? I want to point out that as databases grow, in your case, this isn't the case because you have, I think, a database already made with a bunch of tables. But as a database grows, you would revisit this section and add more tables to your tree structure here. And so you can come in here at any point in time, going back to this database tools relationships, and what you can do is click on show table. And if you click show table, we can add tables to this structure. By clicking the table and clicking add, we can add tables to this structure. So if, let's say, this copy was also part of this, I can click add and it will add it to the structure. Or if I add a table by accident and I don't want to keep it, I can right click and go to hide table because maybe it's not part of this structure. But we can use that to build the structure as we go. I think in your case, we'll already have all the tables, but if you're building a new database with new tables as you go, just wanted to let you know you're going to want to come back and revisit this relationships tab and make sure to keep these relationships updated and correct because that will really pay forward when we talk about analysis. But obviously, that enforce referential integrity button, not only, what that does is not only does it keep your relationship intact, but also from a data standpoint, it's going to keep things neat and clean. Okay. Any questions on relationships or anything like that? Okay, one more concept to kind of review, but otherwise we'll wrap up with this one other concept, and it's something that you may have seen earlier, but I wanted to skip it for now because it sort of doesn't make sense. And this will be a huge concept when we talk about queries in the next session. But when we do this join, if you have a lot of data, as I presume you guys have in your actual databases that we're going to be working with in the next session, when you have a lot of data, there is a tool that can be added in Access called an index. And an index is basically where Access will go through all of the unique values of a field, of a column, and store it in local memory so that when you do this relationship join, it will actually execute the analysis a lot faster. One of the biggest reasons that analysis runs really slowly is that the index for certain columns is not properly set up. And I want to show you how to set that up today. We will definitely review it again when we talk about queries, but I want to talk about that just to give you a sense of it. So when we talked about primary keys and foreign keys, any field that is a primary key or foreign key in any table should have an index. Because what that means, right, if you're a foreign key, that means that you are going to link to some other table, right? So you want to make sure that there's an index on every primary and foreign key in all your tables. It'll ensure that your analysis runs smoothly. What you want to be wary of, though, is do not just go around setting up an index on every table, because an index is being stored in local memory. If you create an index on every column, it creates so much overhead, at some point it actually slows down your system, which is sort of the opposite of what you want to do in Access. So you want to be judicial, but you want to set them up on any field that is a primary or foreign key. Let me show you how to do that. I'm going to get out of relationships and say we'll save this. In your tables, it's actually part of that table structure in design view, and it's part of the table properties at the bottom. Let's hop into our phone number or our contact table. I'm going to right click in table contact and shoot over to design view. And you'll notice that contact ID at the bottom here in our properties, because we had set this up as an auto number and a primary key, Access knew to automatically set this up under indexed. You can see it's yes with no duplicates. It's yes with no duplicates because it's indexed, so it's yes. It's automatically indexed, and Access will automatically index columns for you, fields for you that are auto numbers and primary keys, And it's no duplicates because it's a primary key. It has to be unique, right? Contact ID is unique in table contact. So there are also no duplicates. The options in this dropdown are either no index, yes, no duplicates, or yes, duplicates, okay. What this really means, what they're really trying to say is either there's no index, yes with duplicates, okay, that's the foreign key. And yes with no duplicates is the primary key. So that's what you're going to use in your primary and foreign keys. Let's shoot over to table phone number in design view and see how we have it here. Phone number ID in table phone number. That's our auto ID. So that is automatically indexed with no duplicates. That was an access standard. It did it automatically. And then contact ID, let's take a look at that field. If I click into that row, look at that. It's already been indexed. Yes, but instead of no duplicates, duplicates are now okay, which is exactly the way we wanted to do it. How in the world did Access know to do that? Well, that is because of our naming convention. If we call things, there are words or phrases that are reserved words. Basically, it's looking for specific letters as part of your naming fields, where when you name it that way, it will automatically set up an index for you, which is awesome, but also you have to be wary of naming things using these words, because then it will automatically try and set up an index and maybe you didn't want it. And the two that are the most important, if you end a field with ID or the word code, it will try and automatically set up that field with an index. Phone, on the other hand, if we click into the phone column, you can see indexed no, and that's correct. We would never link or create a relationship, or in your world, if you think of VLOOKUPs, we would never VLOOKUP on phone unless it's some sort of weird circumstance, but really that's not the field that's going to be joined to other tables. It's really going to be contact ID or maybe phone number ID. So because phone number ID is the primary key, it gets an index of yes with no duplicates. And contact ID, because it is a foreign key, gets an index value of yes with duplicates being okay. And the other two fields, no index. So this index field, and we'll review it again, but as we run queries and create queries to do analysis, it is common where the biggest complaint, this thing is running slow. This is the first thing to check. Check the relationships, and then using those relationships, knowing what those relationships are, then look at the fields to make sure that every field that is involved in a relationship has an index on it. Whether it's unique index or non-unique index, that's okay, but you want to make sure the index is set up. Any questions on that? Or anything really, because that is the last topic for us to cover. If we go back to and do a quick review, and based on our agenda for today, we basically covered everything in terms of what a relational database is. We talked about normalization and standardization. We talked about the interface and the layout and all the tables and fields and joined, and I even got to sneak in some indexes, which is really adding in indexes. We talked about that as well. So with that, that is my last topic. I open out the floor now to all of you folks. We have some time if you want it. Any questions, anything from before that you want me to review? This would be the time.
Oh, you know what? I have a good question then. So let's say we have a lot of databases.
Yes.
They're already pre-existing, have a lot of data in them. A lot of them don't have primary keys. A lot of them obviously don't have things very, very clear, maybe from a decade ago. What would be the best way, in your opinion, to learn, to grow and develop the relationship within, or on a table level, obviously, since you guys haven't gone to queries yet? Do you have any advice for the people here?
So you're saying you have a bunch of tables, but the primary keys and all that have not been set up, and so how do you do that, right?
Not only that, but I guess what would be the best way to navigate Axe databases that were established before you? What's the best way to learn? What's the best way to really go through it and be able to figure out, let's say, the relationships so you can do it?
Right, yeah. So really, unfortunately, there is no trick or magic to that. And as let's say I were to inherit a database or somebody were to give me a database to rework or to do something with, that is a bulk of the time you spend is getting dirty, quick and dirty, and figuring it out. If people did not set up a relationships tab, as we started doing here, one thing you can do is you can go into this relationships tab, and let's say it didn't have anything. So I'm going to hide these for a second. Let's say it didn't have anything. It was completely blank. You can click in Show Table and select all of these tables. You can hold the Shift key to select everything on this form. Take all the tables and add them, or maybe look at chunks and add them to this layout, and then reorganize them. Look at the columns that exist, right? So here's a table that we imported that has all these columns and this other sample. Look at the columns that are in that table. I understand that maybe primary keys aren't set up, but look at the tables values, look at all the tables, rearrange these boxes to kind of start grouping together things. Like, for example, if you have a PO database, right, maybe there's one thing that has like an item list and another table that you see, oh, this has prices on it. Maybe these two are related. Because of the way we have it set up with the overlapping windows, if you can kind of set this up in one part of the screen, and maybe you're like, okay, well, let me take a look at this. So you open up the table, and maybe you kind of minimize it like that just so you can kind of see what some of the data is, and you have to start to find the relationships. If you're not given those relationships, you have to develop them on your own. So you have to analyze the data and take a look. Maybe we open one table, maybe we open another, and we kind of open them side by side, or up and down like this to say, hey, do these relate? Can we find a relationship between them? And you start to build your map here in the relationships tab as you go. And in a system that has many tables, you could very easily spend a week, if not more, trying to figure out what those are. That is not uncommon, and that is a task in and of itself, and there is no trick to it really. It's just doing the dirty work of getting into the data and starting to understand, because yeah, it's great when we set up our own tables, we can name the things the same, but maybe they're not named the same. Maybe invoice ID in one table is called invoice number in some other. So you have to look and find those relationships. And in the next sequence, we'll talk about queries, where we can talk about how to actually help do some of those analytics. But we can use these table layouts to do things like filters, right? To figure out, is there a relationship? So maybe you come in here to one table and maybe you zero in on one specific value here, and then up here in another table you zero in on another that you think that maybe has a relationship, right? So maybe maybe you can find, you filter down two tables like this and say, hey, are these related somehow? Is this the same order, or is this the same person? Using these filters is what I would suggest in table view, at least, to help you figure out what that data relationship is if you are not given it, if people have not given it to you up front. Yeah, and that is a brute of a task, and it is a process, but it is not uncommon to spend a lot of time up front with a new database that someone has just kind of given you or you've inherited. It is not uncommon to have to spend a bunch of time understanding that, and that's why these relationships and these data tables, you will often have kind of one person that is your kind of the owner of that database, that knows those relationships up front really well. And when you're setting up your own new database, you are that owner because you know how you set it up. And you begin, if you're delusional, you get delusional, and you start to see these in your head, these relationships. You really need to be always cognizant of how these tables all relate. And this should be your mental mind map, if you will, of how these tables all relate. You can print this relationship out after you're done setting it all up. You can print this out so that you can kind of have that to reference, or for other folks to reference. You just go to File, Print, by the way. So you can print this relationship out, but yes, that process is a tedious one, but one that is necessary to learn what is in a system that has been inherited. Yeah. Good question. Anyone else?
Any other organization suggestions you have in terms of, because I mean, for us, we have inventory, we have production, we have sales, we have GL activity. Setting up a set of databases to organize and have those out distinctly, have you found any naming conventions or ways of organizing it better so that they're
Yeah. So what you'll notice, so my naming convention, what I like to use for systems is I will typically use underscores to be separators for things that maybe like a subcategory of something if I have a bunch of names of things. Let me actually see, maybe I can bring up a sample system that has a lot of tables. Let me think of a system with a lot of tables, and I can kind of show you how I've named these things, but let's see. Let me see what I can show you. Bear with me for a second here. All right, let me just bring up, actually, sorry about that, hold on. So here is a system that I've built. Now it's got a bunch of forms and stuff like that, but here are all the tables that I've built, okay, in this system. And you can see here, I tried to group things like distributor contacts, distributor country, TBL everything, and then for this section, I have some things split up into different parts of the world. Like this is Europe, this is the rest of the world, this is US. I used an underscore so that I know that these things are all kind of grouped together. So this would be an example of something that maybe if you are renaming tables, you can, one type of naming convention. So maybe you have TBL, whatever it is, and then maybe if there are subcategories of that, underscore with whatever. It visually, I think, kind of appeals to my eye at least. And when we get into queries, you'll see that as well with my naming convention, QRY with whatever it is. If it's a query that leads to a report, I have QRY RPT for that. But that is one way to do it with the naming convention. And that's just kind of one sample. I mean, this is obviously not even that many tables, but it gives you a sense of it. So if you have a lot of things, 5, 6 tables all dealing with sales, maybe it's TBL sales and then underscore something, right? That's one way to do it. The other thing is that as we relate to relationships and we talk about the relationships tab, as you start to build these, you're going to have a lot of tables that relate, but not all tables are related to all other tables, right? You have modules where, like the contact section is all kind of one section. So how you visually organize these tables is going to be really important as well. You're going to bunch up maybe all of your, sales tables together, and you're going to bunch up all of your items tables together and all of your contact tables together. Now, there'll be joins that take you from one section to another, but, you can kind of visually play around to kind of help keep things organized. It's not always easy, and it does take time. So, I mean, it is a tall task to inherit a database that has not had relationships set up, and all of a sudden there's 100 tables or something, and you don't know how anything works. That is in and of itself a project that would take even an experienced database person a while to kind of sort through and figure out and kind of unweave the web, if you will, of tables. But so, there is no trick to it, unfortunately. That is a process of opening tables, looking for specific rows, maybe filtering like I showed you earlier, and then slowly building the relationships. With the naming conventions of tables, you can keep yourself relatively organized. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, in that case, let me just do some wrap up. This PowerPoint presentation that just has a couple of these things, really mostly for these data objects and data types, I think is a helpful reference guide, and some of the joins. This will be emailed to you guys, or Eric, I'll just email it to you and you can disseminate it out if you don't mind.
That'd be great.
Great. I can email that to you. In addition, the recording of this call, this whole class and webinar has been recorded. We will process that for Windows Media, like a Windows Media file. We will save that, and Eric will get that to you as well. So everybody in the class, you can review something from something I've said as part of the class, so you can have the recording as well. In addition to all of that, you can email myself. Again, my name is Stan. You can email me, stan@excelandaccess.com. And Christopher, who is the owner of excelandaccess.com, wasn't on the call today, but you can email him as well. and we can help you out if you get stuck. And otherwise, we'll be looking forward to, hopefully this has put together a nice foundation for databases in general, and Access specifically, navigating it, tables, really focusing on tables so far and getting data in and how to navigate your way around it. And then in the next session, now that we have tables, what do we do with them? We start to analyze all the data and we talk about queries. And that'll be the next session. And really, that's where we get into the heart of the matter of doing our analytics. So unless there are any other questions, we can wrap it up.
Thanks again for your time, Stan. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to getting your email. And everyone else on the call, I'll email you all the information once I have received it and give that to you guys so you can use the reference later on.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciated it. Had a great time. Hope you all enjoyed it, and hopefully it was helpful. And I look forward to speaking with you all soon again.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Stan.
All right. Take care, everybody.